Very happy to welcome you on behalf of the Film Industry Office of Odessa Film Festival. I've been coming here to this festival for 5 years in different functions. As many of you know, I'm originally coming from Georgia, but for 2 years now I'm working with the festival, and I'm really delighted and thankful to the top management of this festival for giving me the opportunity to contribute, to enhance the industry programs, and to promote the festival to the professionals internationally who have not yet discovered it. Being a Georgian person and knowing the history of Ukraine, I know very well how important it is to have a number of supporters and to let young Ukrainian talents know that there are a lot of people who are willing to discover, they are curious, and they are really here to meet you and to potentially do things together. But before we go into the specific industry pillar of Cinema Backstage, I would like to welcome the president of the festival, Victoria Zigitska, who will tell us about that.
Hello everyone, so we'd like to welcome everybody and attend the International Film Festival, which grew from 40,000 participants in 2010 to more than 150,000 participants in 2018. And hopefully this year will be much bigger. We added new locations, so happy to share where we are, what we've done so far. Of course, the most important issues for us today is to bring Ukrainian cinema to the international landscape, but of course having more countries which are working co-production with Ukraine is crucially important for us, as well as the fact that we have to close as quick as possible the Euromach contract and finalize their base, because Ukraine has the potential to be one of the most attractive geographies in Eastern Europe, which can offer everything. They have amazing nature, amazing people, their strong desire to work and to produce as many great movies as possible. And the good news for the 10th anniversary of the Film Festival this year, that Ukrainian movie is in top 10 on box offices this year for the first time. And I think that the box office of 10 million plus is just the first step. The next step will be to win Hollywood studios and to have much bigger box offices. And thanks to the co-production, it will be really possible because we have to expand, promote, and join forces with the international cinema community in order to bring the cinema to many more people. And we see that the opportunity to do much more in Ukraine is there. So let's join forces and explore this opportunity and bring the industry to the new level. Thank you very much for coming, and hope to see you many more, another 10 and 100 years at the Film Festival. And all the best and have a great festival. Thank you very much.
Yulia Sinkovich, general producer of the festival, someone who works very hard to make this happen. Thank you, and welcome to the 10th Odessa International Film Festival. Welcome to the second conference, Cinema Backstage, which for the first time was held last year together with Tamara. We organized it, and you can see the difference. Many more people came. I believe that it brings a lot of input today. I believe that it lifts up the level of the Film Industry Office. I'm very much honored to have all the guests here who will be speaking today at the panels. And really, for Ukraine, it's an important topic right now because of many things which happened in the development of the film industry over the past years. I recall that maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, at international film festivals, there were maybe 5 producers, 6 producers from Ukraine. Now it's like hundreds who come and network and look for partners and pitch their projects. So exactly what Victoria said, Ukraine has a big potential for co-production. Ukraine has facilities, Ukraine has mountains, the sea, old castles, urbanistic landscapes, and so on.
And there are conditions and really good people, professionals, who can be reliable partners. And I would like you to see how Ukraine looks like now on the video.
So let me first give a very short intro on what do we aim on here. This idea last year that came up for Cinema Backstage is to allocate a couple of hours to a very informal, rather inclusive atmosphere where we can discuss the topics that are vital in the international scenery for cinema. And also see how those topics are echoed in Ukraine, but not only. Because here in this room, I'm very happy to see a lot of important regional players. And when I say region, I see the representatives of Georgian film industry, Moldovan, whatever you like, post-Soviet countries, Eastern partnerships. And this is also one of the new strategies of the festival, that the pitching element is also from this year onwards open to our neighbors. So the idea is that even though we always need to compete, we also need to stand together and we need to create a place where best of the content, established and the young talent are getting together. Last year, the Cinema Backstage topic was centered on the gender equality issue. And the, let's say, elevated question was whether it is a myth or reality to invent the gender equality. I shall be very honest, this was the event that made me the most nervous in my life, because I really didn't know what to expect, and I knew that I had 14 speakers, more or less on a different viewpoint. And somehow it turned out to be really very interesting event. Julia and I, we got very positive feedback afterwards, and what's important for me personally, that there is a spin-off of this action already this year, and tomorrow there will be another panel that will now tackle deeper into the action, not about the policy framework, but about the action in this direction. So this year, what we will discuss with really, I would say, fantastic speakers that we have for this panel is the issue of co-productions. What does it mean to co-produce? Of course, no one's going to teach or preach here. Do we co-produce mostly for financial reasons? Is there a really solid cultural element? Does it contribute to the cultural enhancement? And maybe somewhere on a high level, it makes us be more inclusive and somehow less nationalistic. And why it is important in this region? Because in many ways, internationally, be it Western Europe or other parts, when you had continuous development of industries in different directions, specifically in Ukraine and in Georgia, we have a very recent memory. What does it mean to be on war? And when a country is at war, not always governments have the direct priority to invest in cultural sectors. And there has to be a way in which we, let's say, on one hand, policymakers, but also, and most importantly, practitioners, have a chance to make our voices be heard. So when we are always preaching something to our local environment, the world is developing outside. And what we are trying to do is to narrow it down as much as possible, to bring issues closer, and to understand who are the people behind the policy making. Nothing is parachuted into agenda. There are strong people, opinionative people, who are setting the set of action in which they believe they contribute to the better cooperation in the cinema. And then there are the whole champions, the producers in this case, who really need to dress somehow, if possible, those framework into their daily action. They need to produce and they need to manage. And a lot of values, in my view, come up. This is a real, if still relevant, Europeanness of the cinema. It is about leadership, it is about conflict resolution, and a lot of issues that are not necessarily part of the contract when you co-produce. And we will have two parts today. First part, we have excellent policymakers talking openly, without preaching, being open to your questions about their strategies, their vision, present, but also the future. And after a break, there will be a set of producers from all over the world, really, who will talk us through what it was for them to co-produce or what it is, what are the issues that they are going through, and how do they envisage the future. So saying that, I would also please ask you, don't be shy. If you have questions, I will allocate time after the first round of the conversation. Just let me know, and all of our speakers will be very happy to answer the questions or to listen to your contributions. And now I would like to invite the speakers of the part 2, the policymakers, the ones who are really there to ensure that the framework and the ecosystem is working well. And I would like Roberto Ola to join me as the Executive Director of Eurimage. Please, Managing Director of Media Board of Washington. Senior consultant international for Israeli group, and someone who's been heading the fund for over 20 years, and we all know it. Philip Ilienko, head of the Ukraine Sales Agency. Alex Freiland, policy advisor for the EU Affairs for Romania Center. And before I take this seat, you will see in the leaflet that there was one more person, Karin Schopweiler, Deputy Director of Luxembourgish Film Fund, meant to be here. That is the only literally last-minute cancellation that we have for a very personal and sadly family-related issues. Everyone who knows Karin knows how beautiful she is, so I'm not going to really read the long email because we all know we are all human beings, these kind of things happen. And I know that Victoria and Julia will find a way next year to make her introduce the newly established co-production support scheme of Luxembourg, which she was really keen to present to Ukrainian and the regional talent. So now the panel is complete. Let me first thank you all for being here. I made a little calculation last night. Apart from Kirsten and Catriel, who are even on an advisory board of the film festival and are the supporters of the festival, of course, we have more than 50% of people coming back from last year and another 50% of new arrivals, Michael. And this is really important for me, and this is important for the festival. So thanks very much for being here. And maybe you agree, maybe not, but every action, both on the policy-making side and on the practicing side, has a human being behind. Somehow there is a set of mindset that is really lobbying for certain action, and there are people who are championing to create schemes where filmmakers could work in a better environment. And when I look at the panel today, I realized the person that is solely focused on co-production support, and he's not, he somehow, some producers told me, well, when I think of a co-production, it's all about Eurimage. So I thought maybe it would be nice, Roberto, if we start and you give us a little bit of a chat of why Council of Europe has created a special support mechanisms for co-productions. What is the economic and the cultural aim for it? And I think this is especially important for Ukrainian filmmakers because since it only seems 2 weeks that I'm not a Georgian representative to Eurimage anymore, and I have a vivid memory that we all supported very strongly Ukrainian accession, and that is having a double result somehow, good for local interest, but also elevating it to the major question of our talk.
Thank you to the festival for inviting me, and to Tamara for putting me in the panel. Yes, Eurimage does essentially co-production. We also do a bit of distribution and cinema support for the countries that are not part of the media program. And it's a minor part of the budget for the fund. And the fund is devoted 90% to the co-production cause. Why the Council of Europe decided to invest in co-production? 30 years ago, and I was not working there at the time, 30 years ago, the media program was not doing it. It was not called the media program of the European Union at that time. There were pilot projects, but the idea was to have the European institutions investing in cinema. But the approach at that time was purely economic. And the Council of Europe has nothing to do with economy. It is more about freedom, freedom of expression, and pluralism and diversity. So I would say that the DNA of Image was putting together resources and political will from different countries in Europe to make sure that filmmakers could express themselves despite the fact that the films they were proposing, they wanted to make, were not necessarily economically very successful, meaning that the main objective why they were doing those films was not necessarily making money. That's why the Council of Europe started the co-production fund 30 years ago. They started with 12 countries. We are now 39. In October, we're going to be 40 because Argentina is joining Image. As probably you heard, Canada joined Image 2 years ago, so it's beyond the boundaries of geographical Europe. We open up with those countries that have privileged relations with us, without Europeans, meaning they already make films with us. We're not inventing anything new, we're simply strengthening those relations that we already observed in the past. So Image has been doing this for 30 years, looking at what we call now innovative quality, and we can discuss for hours on what innovative and quality filmmaking is about. But the idea is really to help those producers, those filmmakers in general. They want to make films that the market alone cannot produce because they are not necessarily larger audience, therefore they are probably a little bit more difficult to produce, and that's where public funding makes more sense. That's the idea behind the concept.
And I'm wondering if when in your daily work, because you really deal with that on a daily basis with your project managers, one thing is to announce a co-production, and the whole other set is to really monitor what's happening. And I always have a feeling that you have a bit of a hand on the pulse of each project, and it's not always going into the very coordinated direction. And I'm wondering if what is your personal takeaway from all those years? You also worked as a project manager in your Image, now you are the managing director. You know a lot of what's happening in the industry. And I'm wondering if you personally think that the real cultural cooperation is achieved, and what is the cost of it in practice?
That's a difficult question. And I don't think there is only one answer. I think people co-produce for several reasons. Sometimes they co-produce because the project that they want to make needs partners from other countries, because the storyline is like this, because you need to shoot in another country, because some of your characters are not necessarily national. Sometimes for more practical reasons, because you cannot possibly find enough resources of financing in your own territory, you need to find other sources of financing elsewhere. Most of the time, it's a bit of a mix of the two reasons, more cultural and economic. Something that I observed, and probably the producers that will come later can speak better than me, I think there is also another element, there is a human element that goes beyond the project as such, and is the joy of working with people in other countries that share the same taste, the same idea of what filmmaking could or should be like. So it is actually common to see that producers often, not necessarily always, produce with the same partners in other countries because they find reliable people that share the same passion for the work. And co-production is co-ownership. It means sharing ownership of on the rights of the film, but also the revenues that it generates. So you need to have trust on the persons you work with. I would say that there is this double element. On the one hand, you co-produce because the project requires it. If you can avoid it, you avoid it. I would like to open a little parenthesis, and not all film is, in my opinion, should be co-production. Co-production is useful if it is necessary and if it is an added value. Why would you share the cake with somebody else if you can eat it on your own? So you share the cake if you need ingredients in other country to make the pastry the best possible. But once you have decided that you need to co-produce, you co-produce because that project requires it, artistically and or economically, but also because you find partners in other countries that you trust and that you want to share, you believe they want to share the same venture.
I would like to give very briefly the Georgian example. When in 2010 I was appointed as the head of the Georgian National Film Fund, if I'm very honest, I didn't have a big choice. It was absolutely not possible to think of a long-run and long-term strategy towards financing of Georgian talent if I wouldn't be really proactive to work with different funds internationally, really go from one door to another and say that, okay, we might have very limited amount of financing available, but here I am as a state representative and we are supporting our talent. Let's find a way of co-producing. And then the reactions are different. For me, not for romantic reasons, but for a very pragmatic reason. It was essential to set up those partnerships and activities and be able that there would be some German, let's say, aid coming towards Georgian talent, French, so on and so forth. If I look at some of the years when I, for instance, lead produced a specific project, probably this was the biggest nightmare that I had, because this whole set of action that you need to take and human values beyond the contractual obligations is really another story that we will talk with the producers here. So I think there is always this double side, and you really need to understand where is the balance, and it's not about finding one single answer to specific questions, but finding your place in this bigger economy. And from that perspective, I would like to ask Philip actually to tell us about the local strategy for Ukraine. I have friends, Ukrainian producers, who think that it's a bit of a hassle to co-produce with other countries, and if we have 100% financing available, it would be very nice if we stay within Ukraine and do films here. And there is other opinion, as always, who think that it really brings cultural value, and it's nice when, for instance, foreign DOPs come and work here, so on and so forth. So I'm wondering, as a policymaker, what is how does a co-production strategy help you in your work, and where does Ukraine stand right now?
Hello everyone, and on behalf of Ukrainian government, I would like to welcome everyone here in Odessa, in Ukraine. We're very happy to see you all here. And we do quite a lot of films on our own recently, but we also consider it very important to co-produce because of many reasons. Some of them already mentioned, and of course there, I would say, always need extra documentation. We did in the last 5 years, since I'm in the office of the Ukrainian State Film Agency, we completed up till now 19 co-productions which have an official status in terms of the European Convention or any bilateral treaties which we have. By the way, it's great news for us that a couple of weeks ago we signed a audiovisual co-production agreement with Canada, so it gives us a lot of potential to work with colleagues from Canada. We have already a lot of projects in development.
I would like to move now to the country representative, the female real leader that is sitting over there with me, Kirsten. You represent Germany, and here, at least in Georgia, in Ukraine, we always would like to co-produce with Germany, because it's a strong country with very vivid set of support mechanisms. But this is first layer, let's put it that way. And then when we were together in Jerusalem, for instance, I remember one phrase you mentioned, that cinema support is not a first aid. And the project really has to have all kind of brilliant qualities to be given and state support. And I'm just wondering whether a scheme of a co-production does play a role there or not within the fund that you represent. But also on the higher level, today you mentioned that maybe we should question also the rules, how we structure co-productions, and whether there is some room for improvement that we need to bring in, or at least start thinking about. So it would be very interesting to hear your input in those directions.
Thank you for your technical support, Katria, but even being a woman, I think I could have pressed that button. Okay, maybe I might have changed it's interesting that you remember that quote. I probably said it. And maybe the world has changed since I said it. Maybe co-productions and funding co-productions are first aid to save a certain kind of cinema. Because since last year, we see, at least in Germany, that the world for big screen films and for art house films and for cultural films has changed. And usually most of the co-productions we're talking about here today, and we usually, some of us you can book in different groups, and then we can talk about co-production. But our world has changed, and we now have to deal. Cinema is out for a big competition for VOD platforms. Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, and who else? And maybe so it is first aid for cinema. And financing has changed a lot. And so I wish we could go back to a world where co-producing was sort of basically for cultural enhancement. I'm not sure that is a means to survive. And we see also a lot of, at least in Germany, we see a lot of talent, directors, actors, scriptwriters, moving between VOD platforms and cinema. So in the old days, it was, at least in Germany, you had people that worked mainly for TV and others that worked mainly for cinema. And now these worlds are intertwining, and I don't know, a lot of the members of the younger generation, and I see there are quite a few here, don't watch television anymore. And television was a major partner in financing also co-productions, European and other sort of art house co-productions. So I think we have to, when we talked about it over lunch, when we think about the new schemes, maybe, and as a regional fund, we can be pretty flexible. But I think there's a scheme of how to co-produce and how many percentages have to come from one country and how many have to come from another country to fit under some convention. And I think they come from a world where this absolutely made sense, but maybe the streams of financing are not exactly working that way anymore. And it's not sort of my criticism. It came up when Roberto talked about how difficult it is to meet all the requirements that fit for a different age of making audiovisual content. And so when we set up with the MDM together our partnership with Poland, that was the reason why, and because Poland seemed to be pretty much in the same sort of league. They had a public fund, they were pretty large, they had, so they were, it was not completely different than how the two German funds acted. And Turkey started out because there were a lot of Turkish filmmakers in Germany, and so we thought we could build kind of a bridge between Turkey and Germany. It's working so-so, and of course the change of governments in both countries that cannot be left unsaid didn't make things easier. But they are still existing, and we definitely don't want to pull out because we think it's important to strengthen that cultural sector between the two countries.
Thank you for that, because my personal viewpoint is that this is some kind of a scheme which we lack a little bit in this part of the world. I could easily envisage Ukrainian-Georgian cooperation, for instance, on a bilateral level. It can be on a co-development level or production, but also with other countries. And maybe we could have this takeaway. I often had, and I'm sure Philip and other senior executives from other countries in this room always have producers coming saying, we are in this final round of competition in one of the German funds, for instance, or French, and it's really important that we get financed now locally because that's the only way when we will get other country coming in. So it's a way to work a little bit towards that direction. And on the other hand, if we think of kind of healthy co-productions, in many cases neighborhood strategies do play a role, and especially the cultural history that you share in my viewpoint. So I think it could be something that is important that we try to tackle in the not long run, but at least mid-run in our own territories. And I would now like to go to Alex, who is representing a country that is often referred as a small country on cinematic uprisal, Romania. We remember all the films that made the new wave of Romanian cinema. There are always very interesting intellectual cinematic interventions, but I'm wondering, though I know some things that are happening in Romania, I'm wondering how easy it was to support those films and whether a strategy was embedded in national thinking to help producers go out and co-produce. That is the first question, and then we will go into the rest.
Okay. First of all, thank you for inviting me and have the privilege to be at the table with the seniors. I'm the only nuthead at the table. Regarding the question, first of all, I was not around the table back then when the discussions took place. They are the legends. It all started with one very famous film, which was rejected by the film fund back then, because of the way it was structured. So it was the death of Mr. Lazarescu or Cristi Puiu, who the commission decided not to support because it was a non-script, because this is not cinema, this is completely a no-go. And they gave, we have from 1 to 10, they gave a 3 for the script, and they throw it to garbage. And that was more or less the beginning of, a revolution, where actually the filmmakers were the ones who pushed. So, funny enough, even though now I'm representing a public institution, it is mostly the filmmakers who were the ones pushing. So they gathered, they discussed with the authorities back then, and they formed a group, and they worked around establishing and rewriting the law, and for the past, since 2005, when the law was adopted, until now, the Romanian cinema, okay, we have great talent, but it succeeded because, and with the help of all the countries that, especially France, Germany, and lately the neighboring countries who co-produced. because financing and culturally it was not possible to do it on our own. So I would not necessarily attribute, I would not, even though it's tempting to say that it was our national strategy to do that, I would say that it's more of a strategy that it was inherited, it was transferred from the filmmakers' desire to cooperate and to work internationally and to transmit their stories, and it was transmitted further this to the film fund and the way how it was structured in financing for the past years.
Very interesting. I would like to come back to Roberto and first of all appreciate the work that you do on a Eurimage level for really always trying to think forward about the future outlook. Where are the structures going? Do we need to change? But there is one specific term that is flying in the industry recently. It's opening up of the convention, and it's, or some people call it internationalization. And you've contributed actually a lot to it, and the fund's been really taking a lead. So maybe before all of us come back to this topic and have our own opinion, you explain us a little bit what does it really mean, because I'm not sure that all of us, we know it unless we've been really tackled with it, and then the rest.
Yes. Well, Eurimage is a peculiar beast as compared to the other national funds. Because contrary to most of you, you only have one Minister of Culture. We in Eurimage, we have 39. So you need to find a way to put together positions that are very different around the table. And it takes longer than, at national level probably. But it was decided at a certain point that the very reason why Eurimage was supporting co-production had changed as compared to 30 years ago. I told you about the freedom of expression, the diversity that our values enshrined in the international cooperation at European level. But we have to remember that in the 80s, at that time, what you could see in Europe on the screens were essentially American films and few national champions. You would very rarely see films of other countries, of other European countries traveling. This is the 80s, before the media program and Eurimage were created. So at that time, the idea behind Eurimage was let us get together to make sure that our stories can be told and we can watch those stories on our screens and make sure that those stories travel. One of the recipes was making co-production should ensure that the project has in its DNA the ability to travel across borders. Now, 30 years have gone by, and we realized that in Europe we make twice as many films as in the US. So probably the problem in the 80s was quantity. Today, quantity is not, it is a problem on the other side probably. One can ask if we are making too many films, but that's a different topic. Maybe next year you can make a conference about this. The idea of defending ourselves, Europe was called Fortress Europe because there was some sort of protectionism vis-a-vis the US and also commercial tensions between the two parts of the Atlantic Ocean. But in a period where digital technology, internet, has taken off all barriers and walls, does it make sense to only cooperate with those countries that are geographically located in Europe when filmmakers are themselves cooperating with other countries beyond the external boundaries of Europe? And if public funds are there to serve the profession, why are we not following that trend? So that was the first question that we asked ourselves. Does it make sense to have Eurimage only for ourselves? Like, if we were scared of sharing our knowledge, our experience, our club in Europe with other people? Or could we exchange with other culture, learn from them, and bring something to them. And cooperating with Canada brings European films in North America, and those films to Europe. And North American films come to Europe anyway. So the only thing we could do is to gain an open door in North America. So that was one of the reasons why we managed to open up to non-European countries, starting with Canada. Now we follow up with Argentina. There was a study a couple of years ago of the European Audiovisual Observatory. I hope I quoted correctly. It said that the highest growth in consumption of European films beyond the European boundaries was in Latin America. One of the strongest partners for Europeans in the world is Argentina. So it was natural that we talked to them. They were, of course, interested, and the board of management decided to have them on board. So, in a nutshell, Eurimage moved from a policy that was more on a defensive approach, making sure that protective, yes, basically making sure that our screens were filled with European content, into a policy where quantity is there. We should be doing better films, and by listening to the profession that we are there to serve, and making sure that we accompany them in their projects they want to make. That's more or less the logic underlying the change. But let me tell you, and you were there, Tamara, you witnessed the discussion. There was no unanimity at the beginning, at least. It took us years of discussions, and it is not black and white. There are pros and cons in policy decisions like this, and it took Eurimage several years before we open up to non-European countries. But in a nutshell, I wanted to say, as Kirsten was saying, we are in a moment of transition, meaning not only in terms of cooperating beyond European boundaries, but also how you enjoy content and with whom you should make that content. Kirsten talked about the digital platforms. Digital platforms were at the beginning buying content that independent producers and funds were financing. Now they're making content as well. I'm not talking exclusively about series. I'm talking about also feature films. So the rules of the game in the market are changing. We around the table and beyond, all the funders will have to reflect on how to keep on being relevant and making sure that the public funds are spent in the best way possible, making sure that the content reaches the audience.
Thank you very much. I think it really is interesting, especially when the very experienced, let's say, fund or policymakers talk about this important period of a transition. One thing I could definitely say that for smaller countries, or let's say for the countries where the development of the film industry is not continuous, it's even more important, because you have to do sometimes the jumps that even an acrobat cannot do, even the stands. And that I always try in any discussion where, if I'm invited or I'm participating, to make it aware how important it is to really listen. What does it mean to be in transition, and how to translate it into our own national ecosystem? I truly believe in that. And I remember one case, for instance, when I was totally lost to find out what was the case or the level of national distribution of films in Georgia. I was invited to one of the panels, I think in Berlinale, and my great colleagues, some of them are here now, were talking about the digital distribution and how to reach. And when I left, I was really slightly depressed. I thought, okay, so we not only need to build up what's been off for a couple of decades, but we also need to make a leap forward. And somehow I think it is important that both sides that try to collaborate take into account the situation and there is no uniform approach, but certainly there are some peculiarities. But now, as we mentioned, this important element of opening up, there is a country representative here, the country name of which comes very often up in Eurimage off-track discussions. And I can witness and underline and confess everywhere that when we spoke about, I still find it difficult to say past form in Eurimage, but when we spoke about the strategy and ideology, Israel was always a very pure example of what sort of country should somehow, let's say, or would be very welcomed to join, because what they do, what they've done, the code of cinema that somehow they pursue is exactly what Eurimage is looking for, if we like. So I give the floor to Catriel, who can contribute a lot to that. And Kirsten will push the button, yes. And apart from this country, in a second layer, I would like you to give us your opinion about the cost of the co-production as well.
Okay. The cost is very simple. You know, I was a producer for 25 years. I made quite a lot of films. And I co-produced already in the 70s. But then I co-produced one feature film, which is considered probably the worst feature film ever produced in Israel. And I lost everything I ever had. And you know why? Because I entered into international co-production for all the wrong reasons. So I've been there, and for me, co-productions is definitely not a magic formula. I'm not against it, I'm for it, but we really have to go into a co-production eyes wide open. And we have to understand that there is a price to pay, and you have to really decide what is the price that you are ready to pay entering or embarking on the journey of creating or going into a co-production. And I can go on and on and on. But basically, I'm for it if we really understand the rules of the game. Personally, I would say that in my years as the head of the fund, I greenlighted and authorized more than 300 full-length narrative feature films primarily aimed for the cinema. And I would say about 100 of them were international co-productions. I think that we managed to raise almost $90 million in these 20 years, which entered into the Israeli feature films. And having said all of that, I have my questions about international co-productions. And really, not every project calls for it, and everyone has to ask himself endless questions before we embark on this journey. I will not go into too many details, but I would say that there is always a price to pay, and the people who originally or initially set up the production should always remember where do they draw the line and what will be the level of compromise, because it's a partnership, it's a marriage, it will take between 3 to 5 years no matter what. It can be a great honeymoon, it can be a nightmare, or somewhere in between. Definitely there will be compromise, and as I'm married to the same woman for more than 42 years, I know one or two things about compromise, and believe me, it's there, and we have to really take it in consideration. Now, we are not in Eurimage, we are not in Creative Europe. I spent 4 years of my life with endless amount of papers, not on my initiative, to create what was called Med-Image, you know, like Eurimage, Med-Image, endless trips to Marrakesh and Rabat and Cairo and you name it. Nothing happened on a regional base because there was not enough will to create something in the region. And in my case, because I come from a very particular country with very particular regimes, the biggest criticism against international co-productions came from government guys and from official guys who were very much against me. And one time I was called to talk to some top guys in the ministry, and they accused me of looking and greenlighting only projects that will work for co-productions and only looking for projects which will be for the liking of the Europeans. And I had to defend, actually, vis-à-vis the government, the whole idea of co-productions. So as you see, I'm for it, but to be super careful when you decide to embark on this journey. There's a price to pay. And you have to draw the lines and say how much and how far am I ready to pay for this particular form, if you like, or for this particular formula. And I can say it in a very primitive, simplistic, and maybe idiotic equation, which says a bigger budget, more partners, less creative freedom. A small budget, less partner, a higher creative freedom. I'm not sure it's right, but sometimes it is like this.
Alex, I just recalled that Romania had a EU presidency in the beginning of 2009, right? And you had a set of priorities announced. And one was to focus on the importance of the co-production, but also circulation of the works. And I'm wondering, what was the real action that you take, and why did you decide, because you were personally involved in that, to identify this cultural priority in your action?
That's the backstage. Yeah, indeed. So there is every 6 months there is one country who there is an algorithm of each country taking over the presidency of the Council of the European Union. That's a different animal than the Council of Europe. It's part of the EU, of the 28 or 27 plus 1. Depends now how we are counting this. Since 1st of January until end of June, Romania was holding this presidency. And indeed, the part of the priorities of our presidency were focusing on improving the cross-border circulation of audiovisual works by emphasizing the importance of co-productions. So the representatives of the 28 countries in the group that deals with audiovisual works debated for months around a set of conclusions that would it has no legal power, so this is not a law or a directive or something, but it sets out let's call it a basis for a discussion that can be raised afterwards and be translated in some kind of regulation. So I was part of the presidency team as an expert on the audiovisual side, and when we discussed about what we should be the priorities and why co-productions could be, one of them was exactly what I just said earlier. We benefited so much from the co-productions for the past years. It's good to readdress this discussion after 30 years. It's sort of renewing the social contract between the politicians and the cultural audiovisual landscape. Because it was a certain need and a certain circumstances 30 years ago, and nowadays we are again in a certain need and a certain circumstance from all points of view, threats and opportunities. So we discussed that this would be a proper topic to be. Of course, we were a bit more ambitious at the beginning, but then you enter into the negotiations of 28 countries, different interests, different views. So the paper, as it is, 16 pages, it's a political agreement. Let's call it like this. There are, I would say, there are kind of 5 or 6 takeaways that you can they are now further discussed. One of them is the fact that at the level of the Commission there was built a group which is called the Open Method of Coordination Group, which has a mandate now from the member states to to draft a policy recommendation, but a very precise toolkit, a hands-on, to react on the needs of the.
Can I have a quick question
Yes.
there, not to forget afterwards? And when this is done, would practitioners be involved in these conversations, or it's more on the policy side that people will create the toolkit? For instance, would they invite a producer to hear their opinion also, or is it only the policymakers?
In this open method coordination, we just had the first meeting. And it was, let's call it an exploratory discussion where we all discover ourselves. We organized the logistics of the group and some of the areas where we would move forward. One of the key things, yes, it was that we should invite and have at the table practitioners. Another thing which was resulted of the conclusion, it is a result of the conclusion, is to make sure that there is a more structured connection between the European Union and the Council of Europe, actually Eurimage and the Audiovisual Observatory, for cohesion and for more coherence into the wider policy view. And one of the, as I was mentioning about the findings, takeaways, yeah, one of them was yes, creating this structured network, structured connection. Another one was to really look into the opportunities, not only into the threats of technology, in the use of the bureaucratic aspect of co-productions and film financing. If that is going to move one way or another, but I think it's highly important that member states will have to look into this. So if it is blockchain or if it is AI or if it is whatever, but all this matter now. Another thing is it's a recommendation for the member states to revise. Again, it's a recommendation, so it's not obligatory, but to revise national schemes in a way of making them more coherent, one with another. Let's call it that in a way, the member states were competing among themselves. And in some of our views, there is no need of competition among ourselves, because now it's actually better, and it would be much more fruitful for the filmmakers and for the industry to complement each other instead of competing with one against each other. So to find a way how to make all the financing schemes more coherent at the European level, at the member states level, at the regional level, because we have regional funds as well. So from that point of view, in the OMC, we have Eurimage on the table, we have Cineregio on the table, we have Audiovisual Observatory, we have also others, FADS and other stakeholders or producers.
But this is really interesting in terms of at least the aim of coordination, improved coordination, as I understand, between the players. I'm curious to see what's coming out of it.
But end of 2020.
I also understand that this is a process, so I'm not going to be very romantic about it. But okay, we see. And saying that, maybe Catriel, you will talk a little bit about this leadership element in co-productions, because we often say, you remember once we had a conversation and I told you that a lot of producers are coming to me saying, we need to make it a co-production because it will be more sellable, and then we can go to Eurimage, and then we can, there is this whole, and I think that sometimes in those constructions you lose the essence of which you've been speaking already. So could you add to that?
Well, first of all, listening to all of you guys, sometimes I feel quite privileged, the fact that we do not belong to all these European initiatives like Cineregio and all this stuff and administration and bureaucracy, and I was able to run really a kind of a guerrilla type fund, quite independent, being an NGO and facing this huge government criticism throughout the years. And I can say very clearly, we never ever decided to go on a project for the liking of Europeans or any other one. We looked at the cinematic merits of the project. We looked at the quality, the cinematic quality of the project. We never went to say, why won't you do it in English? Why won't you do it like this and that? We remember the pudding era of the European co-productions, and we didn't want to go back to it. But clearly, we always asked about our producers, why do you want, and our filmmakers, why do you want to embark on this journey? And we always understood them that, it's a matter of how you contain and how you shield your director and how you shield your story. because there are co-productions, and we had with Kirsten here a great number of co-productions. Sometimes you have 5, 7, 10 financial sources into one co-production, and each one of them, of course, has an opinion, and if of course, each one of them has something to say. So you can have 10 financiers and one director. And if each one of them will call him every night to tell him, I want to move and in the edit this and that, is going to go crazy. So this is why I think that the producers in this case must be the leaders, must be the guys who safeguard the director and safeguard the story and the project and the essence of the story that they all initially set out to do, and never lose sight. You know, we know that we're in a business, there are endless options of deviation. Everybody has an opinion. As Francois Truffaut said, everybody in the world has two professions. One is his profession and the other one being a film critic. And everybody has an opinion, and you can really drive your director completely crazy. And this is why I think there is a strong element of leadership, especially to producers, to safeguard the director and safeguard the creative process, and always remember the film that we initially set out to do. And there is a strong element here. Also, we have to really do our real homework. You know, it's very nice to go to all this huge pitching industry in Europe, this endless travel agency that we see now. We talk to endless number of people, then we have to check what we call in Yiddish the tachlis, the real concrete of all of that. And then, if the main thing is not, it's nice to talk to us and to all of us, but at the end you have to find your real co-producer partner. Because with him you will go into this marriage. Not with me and not with Kirsten, even if we want it very much. But basically it's your co-producing partner. And to do it, you have to be very careful and do your real homework nowadays to find your co-producing partner. And it means, and I think that we all, and you live now in a privileged era, which I didn't have in the 80s, in the 70s, in the early 90s, when you have IMDb's and Cinandos and all those platforms like ACE and EAV and so on, and you can really do your homework on the potential co-producers before you embark on this journey. And also, you also decide there is a price to pay also in putting together the package. Years ago in a co-production which I made, only to put together the pieces of the puzzle, only to get the money together, I spent more than $85,000 before knowing if this film will ever take off. So it's a journey. If you want to play on the international league, perfectly okay, but you have to understand what you are going and what you are getting into. And in all of this, the producer must be the leader and lead the whole process. Otherwise, it will go down the drain.
Speaking of producers, Philip, could you give us a brief of what's happening? When should Eurimage expect Ukraine joining to have another set of leaders coming on the European level? Because I know that this will be also important in the second part to understand where are we?
To answer that question, I have to give you a short lecture on contemporary Ukrainian politics, which I would rather not, for then it could turn into our discussion, could turn into a more revolutionary form of, which is very traditional for Ukrainians, but usually we like to have revolutions in autumn so we can continue this discussion in a couple of months. But obviously, I think that we did whatever was and more what was depending on the film industry to bring closer this event, and we still will do our best, let's say. And if it would need whatever it takes in terms of what we can influence. So it will be the decision of the next parliament, which will be elected this weekend, hopefully. And as for the the producers, we completely understand what Catriel was saying, and really that's why we also have the same discussions inside the industry, especially when we consider ourselves not very rich country, and it sounds strange when we sit in this beautiful hotel conference room, but nevertheless, so sometimes our also people from the parliament or government and even from the industry are sometimes upset that we support a lot of films from foreign directors, and there is always a discussion why should we do that, and we stand for that we should, of course, making very clear that our producers have to take a strong part in all decision making in that process, and still being independent from us. We don't have any ambition to tell them how to edit the film unless they would ask our opinion. Sometimes they ask everyone, when they don't know what to do. Sometimes they don't need this advice, and that's okay. We're fine with that also. And we have a group of emerging producers who also have big ambition and already have some significant experience. And we also co-produced films financed also by Eurimage, though we don't belong because of the other co-producers. So hopefully when we become the full members, probably in the nearest future, we will become more integrated in the European film industry. So now we still feel ourselves more like our Israeli partners. We have the co-production agreement between us, so we can do it bilaterally without everyone else.
Okay, well, I could go on and on with the speakers, but I would rather open up to the audience. And yeah, there is a question, and there is a microphone. No, there should be, yeah. You present yourself as well, just the profession, just to understand.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just give me a second. Yeah, hi everyone. I appreciate for the great panel. I'm my name is Konstantin. I'm coming from actually the digital thing of OTT platform. I had my experience in that, and I mostly spend just building, product, tech, and stuff. So I have sort of like two questions. I'll try to be as clear as possible. So for me, there's always the entrepreneur or filmmaker and the market, the audience, some group of people that you're doing this for. So the question number one, having the title Why Co-Productions, Pure Financier or Cultural Enhancement? Oh my God. Isn't the real question is why Co-Productions is the market? When you have a story that you feel or believe is relevant for 2, 3, or multiple nations, countries, or ethnic groups that are geographically located in different parts of the world, isn't that the actual reason of co-producing? And the financial part or the terms, as you mentioned, are just the thing to discuss, like if it's acceptable or not. And if it's so, if it's yes, what's the role of the public funds in here to pick up the relevant topic, believing that this is the story that should exist or should be recreated in filmmaking or not? Hopefully I was sort of clear. Thank you very much.
From my experience, I would say that in a number of cases, the fact that there was an international co-production elevated the film to another pedestal in terms of festivals, in terms of festival considerations. And I can tell you, at least in the very first film, the marriage, the story, the late marriage, in which we had a co-producing partner which didn't put even €1 into it in the beginning, but he had a credit, or she had a credit, and because of that, in a way, we got a better positioning towards the festivals and so on. So sometimes it was a strategic decision and not always a financial decision embarking on a co-production. And I must say that I encouraged it because I understood, not always, but in some cases, having co-production partners will elevate or will put your film in somewhat of a different position vis-a-vis the festivals.
Okay, I appreciate it. So the answer is yes in your case, right?
Not necessarily. I would say there are as many reasons for co-productions as there are co-productions. Sometimes it's because of the story. Sometimes because you desperately need financing. And I heard you, and in general, I agree. But I think in a world that is becoming so much more global and cosmopolitan, I'm not sure that all the old rules about, oh, there are different nations making a film. Come on, different nations are making all kinds of things. And I'm not sure that sort of the old worries about whether it's so super complicated that France and Germany and maybe Israel are making a movie in the 21st century are really such a dangerous trip anymore. I mean, we're talking bitcoins, we are talking about you guys who live in a globalized design thinking world. You, I think, will be able to make a co-production for any reason that you feel necessary and right, basically. So I think part of what we've been discussing comes from a world before digitization. Maybe there's, you were talking about marriage and trust and yeah, you don't want people to fuck around with your money, basically, that you put in a co-production. And maybe you get lucky on Tinder for co-producers. Why not? So I think we need to rethink the rules in a modern world. Maybe that's a bit, I'm just trying to look at it from a different way. And we come from old national film institutes, we come from film culture, we come from our identity that is in our stories. It's all true, and I don't think we should abandon that. But I think we should take it to a next level and maybe Tinder a little bit with co-productions.
You want to add up, Katril? No?
You can say something in general. You can see it. But yesterday I was talking with my very dear friend Roberto, and to me, I must say that I just came from a tour in different countries, and I felt that there was what we call a co-productions craze in a way. And to a certain extent that almost I felt a little uneasy, I must admit. One of the countries, the head of the fund over there, decided that the only way to submit to the fund projects will be only in the English language, which is not the language of this country. And then all the documents should be only in English because he has to train the producers for the idea that they will, if they want to go into co-production, and they must go into co-productions, they have to, from the outset, understand that they have to do everything in English, which is not their native language, which is a question mark. And the next step was that he said, because of that, I'm going to send the projects to readers and experts which are not from my country, from different countries, and this way it will work maybe better. For me, it was a little strange. The other places, as we know, the local funds are telling them, first of all, find the co-production, and then we will invest. And we know now the Hungarian system, which we just recently heard, in which they say, you have our money, and you have a letter that you have our money, but we will only give you the money if you prove that you managed to create a co-production. So in some of these policies, to me, are pushing the producers into places which I'm not sure about. Honestly, I really am not sure. The whole idea of, to make it a condition for a state fund or a national fund that first of all bring me the co-production and then I'll decide if to put money into your film and so on. To me, it's a little bit too much, but I may be wrong.
Thank you very much for your question.
I would like to add just to what you said, that you asked about the role of the national funds So we don't decide whether you should do a co-production or do it on your own. It's up to you. We just have a separate calls for local, national projects, which will be done on your own, and co-productions. And it's you who decides how to do that. And we just select the projects for their artistic merits and their potential for the audience, for the festivals, etc. And if you have chosen the way of co-producing, then in order to get the money in the end, you will have to gather the co-production, because this was the condition that you set for yourself, not we didn't imply it for you. It was your decision from the very beginning.
Mathematically speaking, I invested as a fund probably not more than 120,000 euro, and we got all kind of a visibility that a country could have for the international relationships, for putting myself in a possibility. I will never compare the expertise with Kirsten, Catriel, or anyone else, but really being able to show that maybe I operate on a 2 million budget euro annually in Georgia that you allocate for one specific film in your countries, but we are still here and we have talents, and this is the kind of films we could bring. So somehow it's all together, and this is why we need leaders, and we need an individual takeaway how we want to structure our own business model. So that's what our high-level aim is. Other questions? I saw a hand in... No? Okay. Please.
I'd like to say that, I heard you saying this with the leadership, and more or less there are leaders, there are people who are leading one way or another. But I think what we might need or lack nowadays is the courage and the vision to, exactly what Kirsten was mentioning a bit earlier, to step out from what we have been used to do for the past 30 years, and 30 years doesn't sound much, but it is a lot. It is a generation. So it is the courage to step out of it and to include what is outside of what you've been used to, and to see how that can be transformed further. And I think the problem is the lack of courage to have a vision.
Everybody reacted to your question. I will. I agree with everything I said, but at the same time, I was thinking, is cultural enhancement, it was one of your comments, does it still make sense today in a changing environment where production and filmmaking as such is easier because of technology? Now, I don't know the answer to that question. Today, you can make a film with a telephone camera. And in Cannes, there have been examples of films that were shot partly, at least, with that technology. So technology has democratized somehow the means of filmmaking. Some films can be made with market money easily. Some are commercially more ambitious, so they look for what we call equity investment, meaning hard money investors that want to invest in a film and want to recoup and make money out of it, which is perfectly legitimate, and this brings a lot of people to the cinema, and everybody's happy about this. But there are also other films that are more difficult to be made. Why? Because the point of view is different, is the point of view of the author. He or she does not want necessarily to speak to a larger audience, therefore he or she will have a harder time finding larger investors. And these filmmakers, not all those films have to be made, don't get me wrong. It's not simply because you have an artistic idea that you have to make it. But some public funds, like mine, are looking at those films more carefully. And all the time, since we have less money than the project that we can support, therefore there is a tough selection, we ask ourselves all the time, is this an Erimage film? What does it mean, an Erimage film? Is the public investment for a more difficult film, does it make sense in this case? Is it more profitable? Can this film be made without us? It is probably a little bit more larger audience or commercial. Maybe they can do it without us. In a nutshell, the cultural enhancement, that sounds like a bad word, means, is there an added value in that project that deserves to get public funding, even though we know that the exploitation is going to be probably more on a festival circuit or on a niche audience? Don't get me wrong, it's not the projects that do not have an idea of what audience will watch the film that we support. It can be a narrow, very limited audience, but the film deserves to be made. There is a point of view to be expressed, and then we invest in it. If the approach would be purely commercial, we will not have some of the films that are more daring. They are sometimes even disturbing, either because of the storyline or because of the aesthetic approach the filmmakers want to propose. And those films deserve to be made. I come from a country, Italy, where opera is getting most of the public funding in culture. When you buy a ticket for the opera, you buy probably 1/100th of the cost of the opera. The opera is extremely expensive. It needs subsidies. Without subsidies, that beauty cannot exist. So culture enhancement in this context means financing films that without public funding wouldn't exist, basically.
Can I do a small comment, if that's okay? Sure. So you see, that's my point. I'm more about the free market stuff. Sorry, can you speak into the mic? I don't know that anyone is. So my point is that with all these different, platforms, and when we now have direct-to-customer access, because there is an audience who's looking for that, I don't know, some new point of view. Yesterday, when there were, I don't know, cinemas or someone who was actually deciding, are we going to see it or not? That was the problem. So because now you have to give the leverage and finance it. Now there will be 10,000 people that will be happy to see it. And the question is why there's only when there is a possibility of those 10,000 people to pay maybe 10% and get access to it, that's, the problem is solved. So basically my question, what's your role going to be in future? Because eventually, my opinion, your role should be like create the economical tool of people just to vote for that movie that only 10,000 people want to watch, and you will be just like, our job is done, and you can, go and watch it. Did you get my point?
Well, the point is mixed between production and exploitation. The platforms are producing films or TV series that a larger audience probably will look at. It makes sense. At the same time, they can acquire films that have a more narrow audience because in their subscription policy, they will also have a narrow, but that's no problem with that. I mean, it is perfectly possible that a project that has been supported by public fund that is culturally interesting be acquired by a digital platform, and therefore a niche audience through digital distribution can have access to it. One thing does not exclude.
Yeah, I'm sure you're cool with that. That's true.
Can I build up on the future element of your question? I don't think that any fund representative here is sitting in an office not thinking about the future somehow. I think we are obliged, we need to, because of what Kirsten mentioned, because of the change, transition, whatever you like, we are constantly thinking of what should be the role, and we are going to some direction. So maybe we can briefly reply to that, so that the role, I would prefer, at least me personally, that the digital evolution or the new players in this sector does not mean that national funds have no role somehow. So maybe I'm wrong, but I would prefer that I'm not.
I think that in the main essence, the role of the national funds wouldn't be changing that much. Nevertheless, that the technology and media are changing. So because the main principle, what we actually do, and we support both what we call films of high artistic merit, which are made for narrow audiences, but we also support films which are made for larger audience, like we call it, let's say, mainstream films, yeah? Which are also kind of films which are made for entertainment. But we think that our audience needs to have a choice not only of, let's say, American films for entertainment, but also some Ukrainian or European films. And that's why what we do, we just compensate the difference between what producer can recoup from real market. Nevertheless, it's cinemas or digital platforms or whatever, or he's traveling with his films and selling tickets himself. But we don't care about the technology. In order for a film to be made professionally, it needs to monetize its views in any different way which is possible at a certain point of time. And sometimes the cost of production is more than can be recouped from the market, so we just compensate that if we consider the film is worth to be done. So simple like that. And that's it. That's what we basically do, and that's the main purpose of our activity.
Catriel first then.
Because we don't agree on something, so but
that's the beauty of it.
That's the beauty of it. I think that public money, in my opinion, was and still is almost all about taking risks and giving chances. And I think that public money, it's not a privilege that the government or the state gives you. I think that culture is a need, is a commodity, is a service that the country has to provide to its citizens the same way they provide electricity, water, or security. So it's not a matter of will or privilege, or they do us a favor. And this we have to understand. And all the countries in the world have a public funding system, except for the United States. Even India has a public funding system for art house type or whatever different kind of films. And because we come from countries with different languages, we cannot rely, and the business model will not help us recoup our investments. Having said that, I can say for myself at least, that what we managed to do in the last 10 years, that we decided to open up the fund to different genres, that we understood that we have to think more in terms of niche audiences. So we introduced different submission dates with different readers for horror, for zombie, for thrillers, for comedy, and for children. And
we also do erotic.
So, and as Kirsten says, horror for children. But no, the point is that we really understood that we have to open up because there's different type of audiences, there are different needs, and nobody said that a zombie movie as such must be a low-type cinema, or a comedy is a low-type cinema, or whatever. At the end of the day, it depends on the project and on the story, and I'm happy and proud that I greenlighted and financed 4 zombie movies with taxpayers' money, and nobody died. So it's perfectly okay, and it's quite possible this is one way. I'm not saying it's the only way. Definitely not the only way, and the new technologies and everything you said, you're right. But we, in our narrow way, we thought, okay, maybe one of the ways to open up a little and really cater to a certain extent, if one can use the word, to different type of audiences is to go also to niche and genres, and nothing will be wrong for a public fund to think also in genre terms.
Kirsten.
We agree on a lot more things than you might admit, and we are not married. But, and I hate to break it to you, in a zombie film, nobody ever dies. That's the DNA of a zombie film, right? But that's another story. Okay, to come back to your questions, sort of how, as funds, and I cannot speak on a national level, I can just speak on my small regional level. 5 years ago, we started to initiate a program developing and producing, or to support the development and production of series, which we call sort of high-end dramas for usually platforms. And we didn't know how this worked because the financing is different than sort of what we know classically for cinema films. I would say we had a very steep learning curve during that period. It is our goal not to finance total buyouts because then the producer doesn't have rights that he can remonetize. But we are sort of still in the process of learning how that works. That changed, obviously, the financing very much. It changed in international exploitation of projects very much. And I agree, we only have one deadline. I mean, we have 4 deadlines a year, but each deadline is for a whole different genre mix of films. And we try to sharpen our focus by setting benchmarks on as what do we evaluate a film? Is it a film that is sort of very much in the cultural niche, but with a high potential for international festivals? Is it an audience film that's both for cinema, or is it the development and production for, let's say, an SVOD platform? It's, you know, the different sections are very much intertwining, so it's interesting to see. We supported a genre film where nobody died, or very few people died, so it was not for a hardcore audience, and it got picked up by Netflix, and they bought it for Germany. It made a shitload of money. It would have never made that amount of money on any TV pre-sale or in the cinemas. It just got lucky. And so another thing you can learn. And I think we are still in the, we all are still in the transition period, and I believe even Netflix and the others are in a transition period, because we don't know who of the big players will survive. And the big danger is what then will be left of the old system, and how much can we preserve, of which we believe it's essential, for instance, to help young talent to evolve and make their first films to then end up wherever. And I think there are really some values of the old world that we absolutely need to protect and carry on into the future, but we still need to be open to a future way of filmmaking in a, I believe, globalized world.
Thank you very much for that very important intervention, Kirsten. And I would like to hear it. We are close to the final round for the part 1. Any other questions in the room that you would like to voice? Yes? Okay.
Yes, I need to speak Russian. Have you translated? Thank you so much. Я, когда узнала, что будет эта секция, я сразу же решила, что я отложу все свои дела и приеду сюда. Простите, пожалуйста.
Минуточку, можно просто, чтобы все... Does it work? Yes.
Еще раз скажу о том, что когда я узнала, что будет эта секция, я сразу отложила все дела и поехала на детский фестиваль. Правда, я немножечко смущена тем, что тут такая высокоповажная публика. Однако, услышав о том, что нужно выходить за рамки, я подумала, все-таки задам свой вопрос, который, может быть, очень глупый будет, как-то слишком начинающий. Смотрите, я столкнулась с такой ситуацией. Мы практически своими силами создаем короткий артхаусный фильм. И так вышло, что мы его не планировали делать копродукцией, однако нам финансирование пришло из посольства Америки, А так как финансирование было до такой степени маленькое, что композитору осталось только низкий поклон и бесконечная благодарность, соответственно, он пишет на музыку и дарит. Вот. У меня следующий вопрос. Вот я буду, понимаю, что заполнять дальше на фестивале анкеты. Мне считать этот фильм копродукцией только, ну, так как композитор из Турции и из России, мне считать этот фильм копродукцией с Турцией или все-таки американское посольство, которое давало деньги не с претензией «рекламируйте нас», или все-таки, извините, если он очень примитивный вопрос, однако вот меня волнует он, я не могу на него найти ответ.
Thank you very much.
Извините, я не представилась, меня зовут Сия, я режиссер.
Thank you very much. Just one thing before we try to answer that. There are no silly questions, and this is why we are here. All questions are allowed, and not everyone is on the same level of the development. And all my esteemed guests spoke about young talent and the beginners and the importance of supporting them. So you should always ask a question. There's no problem with that. But about the question, I think it's a very peculiar case. I would allow myself saying that it's not about whether it is a co-production or not, because when you think about it, you have to somehow refer to which scheme. If you ask a question whether it's a European co-production or not, it's a no. It's quite straightforward. I also doubt, Philip, that you have a deal, some kind of a bilateral treaty with the US that you could embed.
No one has, actually, as far as I know. And
Roberto would like to answer.
Words sometimes are important, and co-production technically means co-ownership. It means that more than one person owns the rights on the film. For instance, if you and your partner decide to buy a house together and you both pay a price for it, you co-own the house. That is property rights. For a film, it's called intellectual property rights. The logic is more or less the same. And co-production meaning co-owning. Sometimes, in a bizarre way, co-production does not mean necessarily cooperating artistically and technically. There is such a thing called financial co-production, whereby the film is 100% national in terms of artistic and technical input, but is co-owned by two, three more persons. That is a co-production, despite the fact that the film looks 100% national. So technically, co-production is not as synonymous of cooperation. What you were describing was a project in which different people probably were cooperating with different nationalities, and the money was coming from another country. Technically, that does not make it a co-production, but certainly there was cooperation. If you apply to public funds for co-production support, most of them, it depends on the regulation of each fund, but most of them would imply that you need to co-own the rights on the film. And co-production means owning, not only renting a room in the apartment. Is, for instance, having a distribution attached to the project for a limited period of time does not make it a co-production. It is only co-owning that makes it a co-production. That's what we are talking about. When I said before, I don't know if you heard it before, if you can make the cake yourself, meaning make the film yourself, do it, because you don't have to share the cake with somebody else. If you make a co-production, some other people are bringing ingredients to make the cake, and the other persons co-own a chunk of the cake. That's what a co-production is.
Philip, you want to say something? Or? Okay. Then It's 5 o'clock, and I would really like to thank you all very much for your input, for your positive energy, for critical opinions. This is really what we wanted to have. Thank you very much for being here, and we go for the break.